Hi everybody. In this module, we're going to be looking at how we can create a little bit more variation with some hand-painted work so that we can start to really get in depth on the kind of details that we want to add in and get a lot more control than we had before. So let's get started. So you can see here we've got all of our textures basically ready to go, but maybe we want just a little bit more information going on, just something a little bit more kind of customized than the purely procedural textures we've been working with so far. So what we can do first off is start to actually kind of build into what we've already got. So basically, let's look at just a few of our textures as an example of something like that. So let's kind of jump into our oxidization stuff, for example. And let's kind of see what we could work with in here. So what I like to do is, if you see this texture that we've got, one of the things I really like to build into is a paint layer. So this paint layer I will usually set to something like at least an overlay. And let's just bring down the roughness of this brush. And basically what's going to happen is if you press X, you can switch, when you're painting into a mask anyways, you can switch from black to white. And if we start to paint, you'll see what happens here is with these dark values, they start to kind of just push down a little bit more. Let's go to a much lower flow as well, so we can start to kind of paint this in a little bit softer and have pen pressure controlled by flow. Now I could actually push in a little bit more kind of grunge in there, or a little bit less, and this will do some light control. What you'll find over here is the darker or more mid-tone the surface is, the more that black affects it, which can be really, really useful. It means that I can actually kind of remove information or actually bring it up and intensify it by painting with white. Now, if I actually go to something like hard light, I get a lot more control out of this. So I am going to erase with my eraser instead in this case. Let's just pull all of that out. And we can start to see here that if I start to paint with a little bit of black and do this very gradually, I can start to kind of paint away some of that surface while still maintaining some of the existing kind of detail that's there, without necessarily having it just look like a big brush stroke going across that surface. You kind of just darken it in the manner that is appropriate for that kind of surface. Or, potentially, let's go with white, start to intensify that without necessarily having to actually paint into that surface itself and have your brush strokes show a ton. Now, of course, if we wanted to, we could use different kinds of actual brush strokes in this. Again, I do want to turn off pressure or size intensity for some of this stuff, just so you can start to get some light variation in here. Let's lower that flow a whole bunch again, because again, if we're using highlight here, a lot of these settings can be really, really finicky. So you want to kind of just build it in very, very gradually. So if we want to kind of build in a little bit more grunge into this section here, you can do that. So we can just basically start to kind of paint into any of these kind of connecting sections here. Any spot that starts to look a little bit more appropriate for what we're working with. So I can kind of build it into some of these crevices, some of these spots where things kind of connect together, but didn't get some of that grunge that I think is a little bit more appropriate for it. If I wanted to kind of build up this big edge through here, I can do that. And a lot of times it's going to build off of the information that's already there. So for example, through here, I'm kind of maintaining the edge that already shows up in this space. I'm just giving it just a little bit more oomph than it had before, or a little bit less and kind of pulling away from it, which can be a really, really kind of nice result. So again, I can just kind of paint into this, but it has a texture to its own quality that will be maintained from the previous elements that already existed. And then again, I can do the same thing in here. Let's just drop in a paint layer, go real low. I like to set this to, again, that hard light and start to kind of just build that up. So we can start to kind of just get this into some of those little crevices there, maybe right in here a little bit more. This means that I can be a little bit more haphazard with the painting. I don't necessarily need to get too finicky with it. I could increase the flow here just so that we've got something that's going to be nice and sharp in that space. That's pretty good. Now that's a little bit too noticeable in this case, so I actually may want to remove that. Let's bring that flow down. Start to remove. There we go. We don't want to have details that are just popping too much in certain spots. So we can remove some of that there. If there's any spots where we're starting to think that, you know what, this is just a little bit too much in here, you can start to kind of just remove that as well. All of that will just give us the kind of control we're looking for while maintaining. Let's just increase the flow here for this, but get that size down real low and make sure that we're painting with, where's my brush here? I need some of that hardness back. There we go. We can start to paint in just a few little brush strokes in here. Just some light increase in some of those details. Maybe even bring it back in a little bit here. All of this stuff is worth doing because it just gives you that little bit more control that you might have given up in some cases. If there's certain areas where you're thinking, you know what, like this is, like I would say this, for example, is too strong in here. It's just a little bit too much. Doesn't look very believable. But now you can get a little bit more control in there. Same goes for this section in here. Some of it's just a little bit too strong, and you could procedurally get rid of it, but in some cases it's pretty easy just to kind of do it yourself. You get the control and intensity that you want out of this. We could also change the intensity here. So let's just randomize this a little bit more. Let's go decrease that hardness just a little bit. There we go. And then we can start to kind of just cut away from some of this, or again, intensify some of it in certain areas just to make it pop, be just maybe a little bit more interesting than it was before, and give you something compelling to look at. There we go. Because sometimes you're not gonna just get the kind of result that you want. You got to kind of fight for a little bit to get that, and that's going to work out pretty good. Now we can start doing the same thing for some of that stone, but maybe we want to use more specific shapes. That's where stencils will come in, and that we can look at in our next video.